All right, so now we're going to move on to a concept called the iron triangle. So this iron triangle is a three-way alliance among legislators, bureaucrats, and interest groups to make or preserve policies that benefit their respective interests. So let me show you an example of how the iron triangle will work. So we're going to go ahead and just go with the outside red arrows. So Congress would, starting at the top, Congress, and going clockwise, Congress would provide funding and political support for the bureaucracy, who will give low regulation and special favors to the interest groups, and the interest groups will provide electoral support for the Congress. So ultimately, these three entities, Congress, bureaucracy, and interest groups, support each other. That is the idea behind the iron triangle. So how does it work? Everyone in the triangle has a similar interest. Legislators get funding from interest groups and make laws reality with the help of the bureaucracy. Because remember, the bureaucracy is going to be ultimately implementing these laws that are passed by the legislators. Interest groups provide valuable information to bureaucrats, and they provide money to legislators. And the bureau chiefs in the bureaucracy implement legislator policy and interest group goals. So interest groups work hard to make sure that legislators and bureaucracy do what they want. So why are these iron triangles iron? It's very strong. The bond can't be broken by the president or Congress. They're oftentimes referred to as sub-governments. All the real decisions are made among these three groups. They might maintain popular interests that might not be publicly popular, and we're going to give an example in a second. All right, so one possible example is why is tobacco not illegal? And we're going to go ahead and take a look at three entities here in an iron triangle. So you have the House and Senate agricultural subcommittees, you have the Department of Agriculture, and then you have the tobacco farmer interest groups or the tobacco lobby. So once again, a reminder, subcommittees are a committee within a committee. In this case, the committee is the Committee on Agriculture. So House and Senate representatives, sympathetic to tobacco, would receive campaign funds and support from tobacco by interest groups, and the representatives make sure that tobacco farmers are defended through legislation. The Department of Agriculture agency executes the legislation while relying on the congressional budget, which is created by the House and the Senate ultimately. They would approve the budget that is submitted by the president. The interest groups provide the Department of Agriculture with valuable information to effectively execute laws. So the common interest is to keep tobacco alive in order to keep their jobs alive. So the Department of Agriculture, okay, they want the money from the interest groups, and they, as well as the Congress, which is doing its work through this committee. Congress, which is doing its work through committee, wants to have the power to regulate tobacco. They also want money from the interest groups. And the interest groups want to sell both Congress as well as the Department of Agriculture on the positive nature of tobacco. So ultimately is a very you scratch my back, I scratch yours type of relationship where all three of these entities are going to be looking out for each other. So another iron triangle example is this right here. We'll start at the bottom with lobbies. We'll go to the right. So lobbies will provide campaign contributions to congressional committees who provide the budgets as well as give jurisdiction to these executive agencies. And the executive agencies will reward contracts, issue regulations to lobbies, and they all work with each other. Now, another idea related to the iron triangle is the issue network. This says that more complicated connections exist. Iron triangles are seen as too simple. There are interest groups from opposite sides of an issue who compete with each other. So you have this issue network, which is a complex group, includes the media, that debates an issue, and this ultimately slows policymaking. So policymaking is not as smooth with competing demands from interest groups. And the president can appoint an agency head who steers policy, but can never smoothly control the policy due to competing interests. So with an issue network, they see the iron triangle as too simple. There's multiple interest groups that are competing with each other. The debate is ultimately going to make it so policy implementation is not as smooth as some would predict under an iron triangle. All right, let's look at controlling the bureaucracy. So patronage is the practice of rewarding supporters with jobs. This is also known as the spoil system. It was created by Andrew Jackson. Each president turned over the bureaucracy. So they'd get elected and they provide jobs to those that supported them. Now, the Pendleton Act of 1883, created in response to this criticism of patronage, made it so more jobs would be selected on merit. The Hatch Act furthered that. In 1939, agency employees can participate in political activities. Now, this has been softened in recent decades due to issues with the First Amendment. So there's definitely been a trend towards more merit over time. All right, let's look at some criticisms of bureaucracy here. Red tape is the maze of government rules, regulations, and paperwork that make the government overwhelming to citizens. Remember that bureaucrats issue these regulations. These are also called red tape. They can make it difficult for businesses to start. If you ask Republicans, they say this red tape is a job killer. You have conflict. Agencies often work towards opposite goals. So, for example, you have the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, versus the Department of Commerce, for instance. You have duplication. Oftentimes, agencies will appear to do the same thing. So, there's several agencies in the Department of Defense that look out for MIAs and POWs, for example. You have unchecked growth. Agencies expand unnecessarily at high costs. That's definitely a criticism of bureaucracy. There's also a criticism that there's lots of waste in bureaucracy and that there's a lack of accountability because it's difficult to fire incompetent bureaucrats. Okay. All right, let's describe the concept of the iron triangle. We're going to describe 5 major criticisms of bureaucracy. Pause it if you need to. and we'll do the summary. So in a paragraph, describe what you have learned today. All right. See you guys tomorrow.